Most people think America's carrier fleet is unstoppable. But after analyzing $20 billion warships that never sailed, I discovered something shocking. The United States canceled more aircraft carriers than most countries have ever built. And the reasons why will change everything you think you know about military power. Here's what nobody talks about. These weren't just budget cuts. We're talking about political warfare between military branches, technology that made ships obsolete overnight, and strategic gambles that shaped the entire Cold War. By the end of this video, I'll also answer the most popular questions about these ghost carriers. Questions that reveal uncomfortable truths the Navy doesn't want you to know. So, if you want to understand why America killed 20 supercarriers mid-construction, keep watching. This gets darker than you think. The Ghost Escorts. August 12, 1945. 3 days after the atomic bomb hits Nagasaki, American shipyards are running at full capacity, building carriers as fast as humanly possible. 5 escort carriers sit on the planning boards: CVE-128, CVE-129, CVE-130, CVE-131, and CVE-132. None of them have names yet. They're just hull numbers, just plans, just dreams of ships that will never exist. Because that same day, the Navy cancels them all. These weren't massive carriers. They were 10,000-ton Commencement Bay-class ships designed to hunt submarines and protect convoys. Each one would carry 30 aircraft, stretch 557 feet long, and hit 20 knots. But Japan surrendered. Suddenly, building carriers to fight Japanese submarines made zero sense when there were no more Japanese submarines. The cancellation was instant. Materials already purchased got recycled into civilian projects. Workers went home. The war that justified these ships ended before they could begin. Here's what's wild. The Navy had already built 19 Commencement Bay carriers. They worked perfectly. But peace killed numbers 20 through 24 faster than any torpedo could. The Essex-class massacre. Now we escalate. The Essex-class carriers were America's backbone during World War II. 27,000 tons, 90 aircraft. The ships that won the Pacific. The Navy planned 32 of them. 24 got built and became legends. But 6 hulls, CV-50 through CV-55, got wiped from existence before construction even started. President Roosevelt personally canceled their contracts in March 1945. Germany was collapsing. Japan was retreating. Victory was coming. Building 6 more massive carriers when you already had 24 seemed insane. None of these ships got names. CV-50 was supposed to go to Four River Shipyard, CV-51 and CV-52 to Brooklyn, CV-53 to Philadelphia, CV-54 and CV-55 to Norfolk. The yards never laid a single keel. Each canceled Essex would have been 872 feet long, capable of 33 knots, carrying advanced radar and dozens of anti-aircraft guns. They would have cost hundreds of millions of dollars. But here's the brutal truth. America needed that money for post-war recovery more than it needed 6 more carriers. The decision wasn't emotional. It was mathematical. The half-built nightmares. This is where it gets painful. CV-35 Reprisal and CV-46 Iwo Jima weren't just canceled on paper. These ships were actually under construction when the axe fell. Reprisal was laid down at Brooklyn Navy Yard in July 1944. By August 1945, she was 50% complete. Half the hull was assembled. Machinery was being installed. Workers were fitting out interior spaces. Then, On August 12th, construction stopped immediately. The Navy towed her incomplete hull to the dock and scrapped her in November 1949. Imagine being the worker who spent months building a carrier only to watch it get torn apart for scrap without ever sailing. Iwo Jima's story is even worse. Her keel was laid in January 1945 while Marines were fighting the actual Battle of Iwo Jima. She was 25% complete when peace arrived. She was broken up right on the slipway, never even touched water. Both ships could have served for decades. Some Essex carriers operated into the 1970s. Reprisal and Iwo Jima could have had those same long careers. Instead, they became expensive scrap metal. The Navy calculated that finishing them would cost more than just cutting losses. With 20 Essex carriers already operational, 2 more served no purpose. The Midway giants, that vanished. Now we jump to a different beast entirely. The Midway-class carriers were monsters. 45,000 tons with armored flight decks designed to handle the heaviest aircraft imaginable. 3 got built: USS Midway, USS Franklin D. Roosevelt, and USS Coral Sea. But the Navy planned more. CVB-56 and CVB-57 were authorized as follow-on ships. Both canceled on March 28, 1945. Zero construction, just planning documents that got stamped, canceled, and filed away. The reasoning was simple. Midway carriers were incredibly expensive, and the war was ending. Building 2 more when 3 were already under construction seemed wasteful. These ships would have displaced 45,000 tons, stretched 968 feet, and carried over 130 aircraft, 4-inch armor belts, 7-inch flight deck plating, 212,000 shaft horsepower for 33 knots. But by late 1945, the Navy was asking hard questions. Japan's fleet was destroyed. Germany's Navy was gone. Who exactly were these supercarriers supposed to fight? The cancellation signaled a massive shift from unlimited wartime spending to peacetime austerity, where every dollar had to be justified. The supercarrier that started a war. Now we hit the most controversial cancellation in American naval history. USS United States CVA-58 wasn't just another carrier. She was supposed to revolutionize everything. 65,000 tons, flush deck with no island, designed specifically to launch nuclear-armed strategic bombers from the sea. The concept was radical. Massive elevators capable of lifting 100,000-pound aircraft, a flight deck strong enough to be the primary structure of the ship. This was the Navy's bid to become America's nuclear deterrent. Her keel was laid on April 18, 1949. 5 days later, Secretary of Defense Louis Johnson canceled the entire program. What happened next became legendary. Navy Secretary John Sullivan resigned immediately. Multiple admirals got forced out. Congressional hearings erupted. The entire defense establishment fractured. This became known as the Revolt of the Admirals. The real battle wasn't about one ship. It was about who controlled America's nuclear weapons. The newly independent Air Force argued that land-based bombers could deliver nukes cheaper and better than carrier aircraft. Secretary Johnson sided with the Air Force against the Navy, but here's the twist. Johnson's decision proved disastrously wrong. When the Korean War erupted 14 months later, carriers became absolutely essential. Air Force bombers couldn't provide the flexible strike capability that carriers delivered. Johnson was forced to resign. The Navy eventually got its supercarriers anyway, with the Forrestal-class. USS United States would have been 1,090 feet long with a 190-foot wide flight deck. She would have carried 12 to 18 heavy bombers plus 54 fighters, 280,000 horsepower. The cost? $189 million in 1949 money, nearly $2 billion today. That price tag, combined with inter-service rivalry, killed her before she ever sailed. The medium carrier dream. Fast forward to the 1970s. The Navy faces a new problem. Nimitz-class nuclear carriers are incredibly powerful, but insanely expensive. Can America afford to build enough to maintain global presence? Admiral Zumwalt proposes a solution, the CVV, or Medium Aircraft Carrier. Conventionally powered, 52,000 tons, cheaper than a Nimitz, but still capable of operating 55 to 65 aircraft. The design features 2 steam catapults instead of 4. Conventional turbines producing 100,000 horsepower for 27 knots, 912 feet long. The idea is simple. Build more hulls for less money, cover more ocean with more carriers. But CVV hits a political wall. Nuclear carrier advocates argue that smaller means weaker, less fuel, fewer aircraft, reduced sustainability. If you're spending billions anyway, why not buy the best? Budget analysts say CVV doesn't save enough money to justify a new design. By the time you add necessary capabilities, the price climbs close to a nuclear carrier. The Carter administration initially supports it, $1.5 billion per ship versus $2.4 billion for a Nimitz. But the Navy itself eventually turns against CVV. They argue that repeating the conventional USS John F. Kennedy design makes more sense. Then Reagan gets elected. Defense spending increases. The Navy commits to all nuclear supercarriers. Fewer hulls, but maximum individual capability. CVV dies. The last serious attempt to build a cheap American aircraft carrier fails because the U.S. Navy fundamentally doesn't do cheap. The Sea Control Ship experiment. While CVV is being debated, another alternative emerges, the Sea Control Ship, or SCS, even smaller at 13 to 17,000 tons, designed to operate helicopters and Harriers for anti-submarine warfare. Admiral Zumwalt champions it as a way to expand fleet air capability affordably. The concept gets tested on USS Guam. The results are promising. Spain even builds carriers inspired by SCS. But in America, SCS faces brutal opposition. Traditional carrier admirals see it as weakening naval aviation. The Reagan maritime strategy emphasizes offensive operations with supercarriers, not defensive convoy escort. Plus, existing amphibious ships can already operate Harriers and helicopters when needed. Building dedicated light carriers seems redundant. SCS gets canceled before any U.S. hulls are built. The lesson is harsh. In the U.S. Navy, if a ship doesn't have a clear, irreplaceable mission, it doesn't get funded. The nuclear experiments. Before the Nimitz class, the Navy explores multiple nuclear carrier concepts. One frequently mentioned is CVN-13, a bridge design between conventional carriers and fully mature nuclear supercarriers. CVN-13 would use early-generation reactors, smaller than those eventually in Nimitz, with conservative systems. The goal is to field a nuclear carrier sooner, but cost studies reveal problems. Building a first-try nuclear carrier risks locking the fleet into an immature design. Meanwhile, submarine reactor programs are advancing fast. Rather than rush a prototype, the Navy waits. CVN-13 gets canceled in favor of a thoroughly developed design. USS Nimitz CVN-68. Post-Cold War reality. As the Cold War ends, ambitious Nimitz expansion plans quietly scale back. CVN-72, eventually built as USS Abraham Lincoln, has early concept variants far more ambitious than what materializes. Some plans show CVN-72 as a heavily upgraded Nimitz with experimental systems and advanced automation. These enhanced variants get canceled as the Soviet Union collapses and budgets contract. The peace dividend demands lower risk and lower cost. Rather than gamble on experimental carriers, the Navy builds conservative Nimitz repeats. The radical Ford ideas. Even the modern Ford-class undergoes cancellations during design. Early prototype concepts are far more radical than the ships eventually built. Dual islands, dramatically different hulls, extreme automation, revolutionary robotics. As costs are estimated and risks assessed, leadership pulls back. The most experimental ideas get canceled or deferred. The Ford-class that emerges is still advanced with electromagnetic catapults and new arresting gear, but it's built on a conservative hull recognizable as Nimitz evolution. This pattern repeats throughout history. Ambitious carrier concepts get trimmed to manageable reality. The gap between what engineers want and what politicians pay for defines which carriers get built. What it all means. 20 canceled carriers across 8 decades reveal the truth about American naval power. First, technology moves faster than shipbuilding. Carriers ordered in wartime become obsolete in peace. Jets make propeller designs inadequate overnight. Second, politics kills ships as effectively as torpedoes. USS United States dies because the Air Force wins a bureaucratic war. Budget battles determine fleet composition as much as strategy. Third, specialized excellence beats compromised versatility. Light carriers, medium carriers, hybrid designs all fail because they can't match supercarriers or justify costs. Fourth, timing is everything. Carriers canceled in August 1945 are victims of peace. Modern concepts canceled after the Cold War are victims of budget cuts. Finally, these cancellations arguably saved the Navy. By ruthlessly cutting ships that don't fit evolving needs, the Navy avoids wasting resources on obsolete platforms. Every canceled carrier represents a path not taken. Some would have been disasters. Others might have been revolutionary. But collectively, they shaped the fleet by showing what not to build. Why were so many carriers canceled right at World War II's end? Simple. Japan's surrender on August 15, 1945, happened so suddenly that dozens of ships became instantly unnecessary. The Navy already had enough carriers to dominate any opponent. Continuing production would waste billions. Could any canceled carriers have changed history if completed? USS United States is the most interesting case. If built, the Navy might have dominated nuclear strategy earlier, potentially changing the Cold War power balance. But Polaris submarines likely would have taken over strategic deterrence anyway. What happened to materials and workers when carriers were canceled? Materials got recycled into other ships or civilian construction. Workers were laid off as part of massive post-war demobilization. Entire shipyards contracted dramatically. The human cost was significant, but economically necessary. Which cancellation was the biggest mistake? Many historians argue killing USS United States was premature and politically motivated. The Korean War proved carriers were essential, vindicating the Navy. The revolt of the Admirals damaged military cohesion for years. The most important ships are sometimes the ones that never sailed. They teach us what not to build. They show us that knowing when to stop is as important as knowing when to start. If you found this valuable, smash that like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me which canceled carrier shocked you most. Thanks for watching.